Welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving straight into an incredibly passionate and frankly multifaceted speech by Nick Vujicic. If you know Nick, you know his story is just absolutely striking. Born without arms and legs, he spent his life traveling the globe. And his message? It aggressively intertwines his profound physical disability with some really complex arguments on theology, human identity, and resilience. Our goal right now is to deconstruct how he connects these intense themes. We're going to look directly at his own words and stories to understand the sheer architecture of his worldview. No taking sides here. We're just letting his profound claims speak for themselves through our slides. Let's get into it.
To make sense of this pretty wide-ranging presentation, we've broken our analysis down into 5 key pillars: the paradox of pain, confronting science and suffering, false identities versus creator, the ultimate miracle, forgiveness, and finally, becoming someone else's miracle.
Starting right off with Section 1, the paradox of pain.
Vujicic really doesn't ease his audience into his philosophy. He grounds his arguments immediately in some extreme realities. He sets his personal baseline by pointing out that he was born without limbs to deeply Christian parents who were literally out there actively preaching about God's love. And get this profound physical condition went completely undetected across 3 separate medical ultrasounds. He uses this stark reality to explain that, as a kid, he didn't just ask, why me? He specifically asked, if you're a loving God, why did you give me less than the other kids? He essentially frames his very existence as a massive theological challenge.
But he doesn't stop at his own pain. He quickly pivots to horrific real-world evils to challenge his audience. 400. That's the specific, horrifying number of children he cites who are found on a single boat being trafficked from China to Brazil for organ harvesting. He brings up this atrocity, along with mentions of starvation and infant mortality, not just for shock value, but to really build a heavy philosophical foundation. So by laying out both his personal, unexplainable physical limitations and this massive, systemic global suffering, Vujicic forces us to confront the ultimate theological paradox. Basically, if God is a God of miracles, then where is he? It's a classic problem of evil, right? How can a loving, capable creator allow such profound pain? This one question really sets the stage for absolutely everything else he discusses. Moving on to Section 2, confronting science and suffering. Here, we see Vujicic shift gears from questioning God to challenging secular and scientific worldviews. He claims that atheists make up only about 2% of the 6 billion people on Earth at the time of his speech. His argument? The vast majority, that other 98%, believes in some form of destiny or creator. By framing the demographics this way, he's trying to establish that seeking a spiritual answer to suffering is the overwhelming human norm, which kind of positions strict secularism as this extreme minority view. It definitely makes you pause and wonder how your own worldview fits into this whole global picture. Now, the crucial point here is how he pits science directly against the supernatural, constructing this super rigid dichotomy. On one side, you've got accepted scientific models like evolution, the Big Bang Theory, and quantum physics. And on the other, Vujicic's claims of literal, real-time divine action. He actually bluntly dismisses the Big Bang by saying his theory is just God spoke, banging happened. But even more aggressively, he demands to know why science can't explain the instant physical healings he claims to have personally witnessed on camera. Things like blind eye seeing or crooked backs suddenly straightening. He's literally demanding that science answer for the miraculous. To really anchor these sweeping claims, he shares a deeply personal and previously untold anecdote. When he was 19, he was diagnosed with a rare, incurable condition called spinal myelins. Basically, it's a hollowing out of the spinal cord, and doctors told him it would inevitably lead to his spine crumbling and permanent bed rest. Yet he asserts that after some incredibly intense prayer, this massive hollowing inexplicably closed right up to a mere pinhole. Whether you look at this through a medical lens or a spiritual one, for Vujicic, this is his definitive absolute proof that a supernatural creator actively intervenes in our physical reality.
All right, Section 3, false identities versus creator.
Having laid out his views on physical reality and miracles, Vujicic transitions into the psychological realm. He starts analyzing how we, as humans, try to define ourselves. To do this, he introduces an acronym for the psychological barriers holding us back: FEAR. False evidence appearing real. This is a massive concept in his framework. He argues that the narratives we tell ourselves, that we aren't good enough or that we have to fit in just to be loved, are actually just illusions constructed to keep us paralyzed. And this leads to what is arguably one of the most striking comparisons in his entire speech.
He says, fear is the biggest disability of all and will paralyze you more than you being in a wheelchair. Think about that for a second. Coming from a guy with no arms and no legs, that statement carries an insane amount of weight. He's explicitly arguing that internal brokenness, like growing up in a fractured, abusive home or dealing with the relentless teasing of high school, is actually harder to overcome than his own profound physical limitations. He is completely validating emotional and psychological pain as the true paralyzer of the human experience.
Because of this internal brokenness, he says people desperately search for belonging down two distinct paths. On one side, you have temporary identities. This is when people seek validation through money, gangs, drugs, or even changing their physical appearance. He argues these inevitably fail because they demand you change who you fundamentally are. On the other side, his solution? A creator-based identity. Leaning heavily on biblical text, he insists that true peace only comes from understanding you are wonderfully and fearfully made with the specific destiny designed by God. In his view, you just can't find your identity in other flawed human beings. It has to come from the source. It's definitely a challenging thought. Where do we root our own sense of self when all those temporary things fade away?
That brings us to Section 4, the ultimate miracle, forgiveness.
So after talking so much about physical healing and spinal cords, Vujicic completely redefines what a miracle actually is. He illustrates this point through a seriously high-stakes, dramatic anecdote about a Russian pastor. Let's look at the timeline. Day 1. The pastor starts a church in dangerous mafia territory and flat-out refuses to leave despite threats. Next week, tragically, the pastor's son is shot and killed by a mafia hitman. 3 months later, here is the incredible turning point. The pastor is approached by the hitman, and instead of seeking vengeance, the pastor chooses to completely forgive his son's killer. Finally, later down the line, this radical act of grace actually causes the hitman to convert, and that sparks a massive wave of conversions that ultimately erases the mafia presence in the region entirely. Just wild.
So why tell this story? Because for Vujicic, this extreme example of grace proves a much larger point. He says, I received the greatest miracle of all. It's forgiveness. He admits that for a long time he couldn't forgive himself for his own flaws, and he couldn't forgive the people who hurt his family. He ultimately concludes that the greatest miracle isn't regrowing limbs or curing a spine. It's the supernatural capacity to forgive others and yourself, despite immense, suffocating pain.
And finally, Section 5, becoming someone else's miracle.
This right here is the absolute culmination of his worldview, the practical application of all the theology and psychology we've covered so far. On stage, he uses this clever linguistic trick to reframe the very concept of limitation. If you put the word go in front of disabled, it transforms into the phrase God is abled. For him, it's way more than just wordplay. It's a thesis statement. He's arguing that our human limitations, our deepest insecurities, and our physical brokenness aren't mistakes at all. Rather, they're specifically designed vessels intended for a divine creator to step in and demonstrate capability. Basically, your weakness is the exact canvas required for the miraculous.
He anchors this abstract idea with a really heartbreaking, yet practical story of a suicidal 14-year-old girl he met in the UCLA hospital. She was starving from an eating disorder, bullied for her weight, and was just ready to give up. He laid out a specific 3-step vision for her. First, get on the recovery road today. Second, fight to get back on your feet over the next 3 years. And third, and this is the most important part, return to this exact hospital in the future to look another struggling girl in the eye and tell her there is hope. He literally gave her pain a future purpose. He told her that because she survived a broken home, she was equipped to save someone that he, with all of his unique struggles, could never reach.
So we're going to leave you with this final distillation of Nick Vujicic's philosophy. It's a question that really challenges the core of how we view our own struggles. If you don't receive a miracle, if your circumstances don't magically change, if the pain just doesn't go away, how can you become a miracle for someone else? Rather than waiting around for an escape from suffering, how might your specific, unique brokenness be exactly the tool needed to rescue another human being? It's a profound perspective shift, especially coming from a man who has lived it every single day. Thanks so much for joining us as we unpacked these fascinating insights, and we'll see you in the next explainer.